Greetings, young traveler. Come closer and sit by the embers of this dying fire. You have wandered far across the vast expanse of the unknown to find me, and your timing, it is as precise as the shifting of the stars. You seek the echoes of a world long forgotten, do you not?
A tale etched in the scarlet of a wedding robe and the emerald glow of a forbidden pearl. Today, the mists of time part to reveal a soul torn asunder and woven back together by a hand more ancient than the heavens themselves. I shall show you a boy they called a wastrel, a youth born with shattered paths and a future of nothing but ridicule.
They thought they had extinguished his light with a silent poison before his legend could even begin.
But they were wrong. Listen closely, for the air is growing cold with the arrival of a gelid bride, and the dragon has already begun its hunt. Take a breath, for we are about to witness the first act of a grand and bloody legend. The brooms of time are open.
Let the memory begin. I recall the moment the threads of existence were torn asunder, and then woven back together by a hand far more ancient than time itself. It began with the howling wind of the Cloud's End cliff, a place where the world simply stops. I see him there, the young man known as Yun Che, clutching the sky poison pearl as if it were his very soul. He was a man hunted, a man broken, a man who chose the jagged embrace of the abyss over the chains of his enemies. I watched him jump, a falling star of defiance against a gray, uncaring sky. Death should have been his only reward. The cold, final silence of the grave should have claimed him forever. But destiny, it has a cruel and curious way of refusing to let go. The darkness did not last. Instead of the cold crush of the rocks, I watched as his consciousness clawed its way back through a thick, suffocating fog. His eyes snapped open, but the sky he saw was not the gray void of the cliff. Above him hung a canopy of festive red, a banner of celebration that felt like a mockery of the blood he had just spilled. He sat up, his fingers digging into a bed that was soft, too soft. There was no pain, no broken bones, no lingering sting of the poisons that had ravaged his former life. It was a miracle that felt like a trap.
"Xiao-Che, you woke up!" The voice was like a silver bell, shattering the heavy silence of his confusion. I see the girl now, appearing in his blurred vision like a spirit of the spring. She was young, barely 15, with skin as fair as the first snow, and eyes that held a transparency I have rarely seen in all my travels across the dimensions. Her lips were a soft rose, her nose delicate. She radiated a gentleness that seemed to physically push back the shadows of the room. In that moment, staring at her, 2 words escaped the boy's lips, carried by a memory he didn't know he possessed. "Little aunt?" She touched his forehead with hands as cool as jade, her face lighting up with a joy so pure it could melt iron. She spoke of his grandfather's madness, of the doctor they had summoned in a panic, and of the big day that had finally arrived. She did not see the storm brewing in his eyes. She did not notice that the boy she loved as Xiao-Che was currently drowning in the memories of a man named Yun Che. As she rushed out to deliver the news of his recovery, the silence returned, and with it the weight of a dual existence. He sat there, clutching his head as 2 lifetimes collided within his skull. He was Xiao Che, the wastrel of Floating Cloud City, a boy born with shattered paths and a future of ridicule. But he was also Yun Che, the man who had shaken the azure cloud continent and held the power to heal or kill with a single touch. Was the cliff a dream? Was this red-draped room the reality? Or was he a ghost haunting his own past? As he tasted the air, a grim, familiar bitterness coated his tongue. My eyes narrowed as I watched him realize the truth. It was a scent I have encountered in the darkest corners of the empires. Murdering heart powder, a poison so swift and silent it leaves no trace for the living to find. He had not merely fainted from excitement. He had been murdered. Someone had ensured that the worthless grandson would never see his wedding night. But they had forgotten one thing. I watched him lift his left hand, and there, burning with a faint ethereal emerald light, was the mark of the sky poison pearl. It had followed him. It had crossed the veil of death to anchor itself into his new flesh. As he entered the vast, silent world of green light within his own palm, a chilling laughter began to stir in the depths of his soul. The world thought they had killed a lamb, but they had only cleared the way for a monster to take its place. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to bleed into the sky, and I knew the wedding feast was about to be the first act of a grand, bloody legend.
As the emerald light of the sky poison pearl faded back into the boy's palm, the heavy silence of his realization was broken by the rhythmic thud of approaching footsteps. The ghosts of his past life were now forced to contend with the stark, cold reality of his present. I recall the way the air in that small room shifted when the door finally swung open. It was as if a mountain had entered the chamber. Xiao Li, the old lion of the clan, stood there with a gaze that could wither the pride of kings. Behind him followed the city's most esteemed healer, a man whose smile held the bitter sting of a winter frost. They came to find an illness, a reason for the boy's sudden collapse, but their mortal eyes could never see the truth, that a sovereign soul had just claimed this wastrel's shell. I watched the physician press his fingers to the boy's pulse. He spoke of nerves, of the overwhelming pressure of marrying the city's greatest treasure, yet his words were hollow, dripping with a silent, jagged contempt. He saw a good-for-nothing lucky enough to stumble into a goddess's bed, unaware that he was standing before a storm in human form. Xiao Li, however, his heart was not so easily swayed by simple excuses. He had felt the boy's vitality fade hours before. He knew that something had changed, even if he could not name the magic that had brought his grandson back from the edge of the grave. When the room finally emptied, leaving only the elder and the youth, I saw the boy look upon his grandfather's hair. It was as white as a winter shroud, a crown of immeasurable grief earned in a single night of loss. I felt the boy's heart ache, not with the weakness of the old Xiao Che, but the cold, sharp resolve of a man who had seen empires fall. He looked at those silver strands and made a silent vow. He would not remain a shadow. Within him stirred the ancient wisdom of a medical saint, a power that whispered that these shattered paths were not a prison. They were merely a puzzle he would soon solve with blood and fire. "Horse or carriage?" the elder asked, as the morning sun began to bleed through the window. In the past, the boy would have chosen the darkness of the carriage, hiding his shame from the stinging jests of the crowds, but not today. I saw him stand tall, choosing the saddle. He would ride out and claim his bride with his head held high, not for his own vanity, but to restore the honor of the man who had sacrificed everything for him. The old lion smiled,
a rare, genuine spark of pride that warmed the cold room, and I knew the first bridge of this new life had been crossed. As the elder left to arrange the wedding procession, only the young aunt, Xiao Lingxi, remained. She fussed over his red robes, her hands trembling with a mix of playful jealousy and deep protective love. She had been his only anchor in a world of ridicule, a girl who had grown up overnight just to become his shield. I watched her straighten his collar and tighten his belt, her devotion as clear as the morning dew on a lotus petal. In that fleeting, quiet moment, before the world claimed him, the boy looked at her. To the city, Shaoxing Yu was a distant, cold moon to be worshipped, but the girl before him, she was his sun. I saw him move with a speed that defied his supposed weakness, leaning in to press his lips against hers. It was a silent, forbidden rebellion against the paths others had paved for him, a secret memory etched into the scarlet fabric of that day. He walked out of that room a different man, leaving behind a girl who was frozen in a sweetness she hadn't dared to dream of, and a destiny that had just begun to roar.
The lingering warmth of that stolen kiss was still a sweet fire in the boy's veins as he stepped out from the quiet of his room and into the cold, calculating glare of the world that had sought to bury him. I recall the way the festive drums of the Shao clan courtyard seemed to falter for a heartbeat when he appeared. To the onlookers, he was still the fragile wastrel they had mocked for years, but the air around him had grown sharp, heavy with an unseen authority. As he approached his white steed, I watched two figures emerge from the crowd like shadows stretching across a sunlit path. Xiao Yulong, the so-called pride of the generation, and his loyal shadow, Xiao Yang. To any other eyes, Yulong was a paragon of virtue. He moved with a grace that spoke of high cultivation, his smile as polished and bright as a mirror in the morning sun. He spoke words of brotherly affection, offering congratulations that sounded like music to the common ear. But I have wandered through the corridors of time long enough to know the scent of a lie. Beneath that mask of kindness, I saw a hunger that was not for gold or glory, but for the very woman the boy was set to wed. Yulong's heart was a garden of thorns, and he looked at the boy not as a brother, but as a minor obstacle he had already tried to remove. I watched the boy, Shao Qi, return that smile with an elegance that baffled the crowd. He did not cower. He did not show the flickering uncertainty of the child they once knew. He mounted his horse with the ease of a sovereign, nodding to his brother with a calm that felt like a blade hidden in silk. He knew. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered on Yulong's hands. He knew the source of the murdering heart powder. He knew the hand that had reached out in the dark to silence his heart before the sun could rise. The moment the wedding procession began its rhythmic march out of the gates, the festive mask of the courtyard shattered like cheap glass. I stayed behind for a moment, invisible in the ripples of time, to watch the vipers reveal their true skin. The instant the boy was out of sight, Yulong's face distorted into something monstrous, a primal, jagged rage that turned his handsome features into a gargoyle's leer. He struck his follower with a blow that echoed against the stone walls, his voice a venomous hiss that chilled the air. He cursed the failure of his poison. He had spent a fortune to ensure the boy never reached the altar, desperate to keep the goddess Shao King Yun from being tainted by a commoner's name. Yet even in his fury, he found a dark comfort. He believed that even if the marriage proceeded, a girl destined for the heavens would never allow a piece of trash to touch her. He laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering over a grave, convinced that once she was within the clan walls, she would eventually turn her gaze toward the genius Yulong.
They walked away, plotting their next betrayal, utterly unaware that the boy they thought was a victim had already begun to weave a net of his own. The dragon was no longer sleeping, it was hunting.
While the vipers whispered their venomous hopes within the clan walls, the boy was already riding through the heart of the city, a single scarlet spark moving through a forest of cold, judging eyes. I recall the sight of floating Cloud City on that morning. It was a place of humble stones and ancient traditions, but today it was transformed into a theater of the grand and the bitter. A river of scarlet silk had been unfurled, stretching in long, defiant twists from the gates of the Shah clan toward the distant estate of the Shah. It was a path of honor, a carpet fit for a king. Yet as the wedding procession began its rhythmic march, the air became thick with a different kind of current, a tide of whispers that stung like salt in an open wound. I walked among the shadows of the crowd, listening to the cacophony of malice. They spoke of the boy atop the white horse as if he were already a ghost, a wastrel with broken paths who dared to reach for the city's most radiant star. I heard them lament that a goddess like Xia Qingyue was being sacrificed to a good-for-nothing simply because of a dead father's ancient oath. The envy was a physical weight, a jagged resentment that made the very air feel cold despite the festive drums. They called him a parasite, a stain on the city's pride, waiting for him to crumble under the weight of their collective disdain. But as I looked at the boy in his dazzling red robes, I saw something that silenced the mockery in my own heart. He did not cower. His eyes were serene, reflecting a character as deep and still as a mountain lake. With his long hair fluttering like a dark banner and a faint, elegant smile upon his delicate face, he rode through the storm of scorn as if he were a sovereign passing through a minor, noisy disturbance. He looked like a living doll of porcelain, yet beneath that fragile surface I felt the first tremors of a waking titan. He wasn't merely ignoring them, he was transcending them. When the gates of the Shah clan finally loomed ahead, the tension was shattered by a thunderous, joyous cry that seemed to shake the very earth itself. "Brother-in-law!" And then a mountain of a boy came charging forward. It was Sha Yuanba. Only 15 years of age, yet he stood 2 meters tall, a titan of bronze muscle and honest, simple joy. In a city of vipers and critics, he was the boy's only true friend, a massive soul who saw not a wastrel, but a brother. I watched them meet, the contrast between the delicate Groom and the gargantuan youth, a sight that would linger in the city's memory for years to come. Inside the estate, the atmosphere shifted from the chaos of the streets to the heavy solemnity of destiny. I watched the boy dismount to greet Xia Hongyi, the master of the house. Hongyi was a man of immense wealth, but more importantly, he was a man of his word. He spoke of the boy's father, Xiao Ying, with a reverence that brought a sharp, smoldering light to the boy's eyes. He told the youth to ignore the wagging tongues of the world, to treat his daughter well and remain righteous, for the blood of a hero flowed in his veins. It was then that I heard the dragon truly stir. The boy did not merely nod. He spoke with a voice that held the edge of a tempered blade. He made a vow that chilled the air, promising that the day was coming when his broken paths would be mended, that the sleeping dragon would rise from the abyss to silence every mocking tongue in the empire.
I saw the flash of genuine surprise in the father-in-law's eyes. He had expected a lamb to lead to the slaughter, but in that moment he realized he had just opened his doors to a storm that would eventually consume the heavens.
With the echoes of his dragon's vow still vibrating in the air of the Shah estate, the heavy inner doors finally groaned open, revealing the true gravity of the destiny he had come to claim. I recall the moment Sha Qingyue appeared, and it was as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath. She emerged between her bridesmaids like a vision from a long-lost era of gods and immortals. She wore a red phoenix coronet of shimmering gold, a fine curtain of beads cascading down to hide a face that the poets of Floating Cloud City could only dream of describing. Her scarlet robes, embroidered with clouds of fortune, flowed around her like a river of blood and gold, and her slender waist was cinched by a belt of exquisite jade. Every step she took was light, elegant, as if she were treading upon the very clouds instead of the stone floor. I watched the young Xiaoqie step forward to lead her. It was a simple gesture of tradition, yet as their hands met for the first time, I saw a flicker of sharp pain cross the boy's brow, a piercing, unnatural cold, an energy far beyond the strength of any mortal girl, surged from her palm and through his arm, threatening to turn his very blood into shards of ice. It was a test, a silent warning from a fairy to a wastrel. Most men would have collapsed or cried out, but he remained as silent as a grave, his face an indifferent mask of stone. Beneath those golden beads, I caught the briefest glint of surprise in the girl's icy eyes. She had tested the strength of his soul, and he had not broken. The journey back to the Shao clan was a spectacle of heavy, expectant silence. When they reached the gates, the streets were so choked with spectators that not even a drop of water could have passed through. They didn't come for the groom, they came to catch a glimpse of the fairy of the clouds who was now tethered to a commoner. Inside the central hall, the air was different, heavy with the scent of sandalwood and the cold, sharp sting of hypocrisy. The hall had been transformed into a palace of topaz and pearls, a grandeur funded entirely by the bride's father, for the Shah clan would never have spent such wealth on a shameful heir like Xiaoqie. I sat in the deep shadows, watching the elders of the clan. Their smiles were jagged pieces of glass, their congratulations were laced with a cynical venom that everyone in the room could hear. To them, Xiaoqie was a stain on their lineage, a trash existence that only possessed a name because of his grandfather, the great elder Xiao Lieh. I watched the ceremony unfold, the three bows that bind two souls under the gaze of heaven and earth. The younger disciples watched with teeth clenched in a fury of envy, praying for a moment of resistance from the bride, a sign that she was being forced into this farce. But Sha Qingyue moved with a grace that was perfect and terrifyingly distant. As they bowed to each other, the final seal of their union, I saw the boy look through the gaps of her bead veil. He met eyes that were as cold as the absolute void, eyes that revealed no emotion, no warmth, no mercy. He wasn't thinking of the wedding feast. He was wondering about the mysterious, chilling power she held, a power that suggested the girl he had just married was far more dangerous than any legend had ever dared to whisper. As the ceremony ended and the cynical laughter of the elders filled the hall, I knew the real battle for his survival was only just beginning.
And so the vows were exchanged, and a bond was forged in a hall filled with more poison than 1,000 murdering heart powders.
I have watched countless dynasties rise and fall, young traveler, and I have learned that the most dangerous storms do not always begin with thunder. Sometimes they begin with a silent, frozen touch between two strangers who were never meant to meet. I look at that boy, CHRONICLES, or should I say the soul that now commands his breath. He stands amidst a clan that despises him, bound to a woman who carries the cold of the absolute void in her veins. Most would see only a victim or a lucky fool, but I see a man who has already tasted death and found it wanting. He does not seek approval, he seeks a way to turn his shattered veins into a weapon that will make the world tremble. It makes one wonder, when the world brands you as trash, do you wither like a guttering candle, or do you burn the very world that dared to judge you? The wedding feast is begun, and the wine flows as freely as the hidden malice in the Shao clan. But as the sun sets on floating Cloud City, the true trial is only beginning. For when the guests depart and the red candles burn low, what will happen when the wastrel and the fairy are finally alone behind the veil of the bridal chamber? But that is a memory for another time. The mists are closing, and my eyes grow weary of the scarlet light. Seek me again when the moon is high, and we shall see if the dragon can survive the frost of its own nest. Until we meet again in the currents of time, stay vigilant, traveler.